They sell out stadiums in minutes, break records like it's breakfast, and move millions with a single lyric. But behind the spotlight, behind the perfect choreography and the flawless smiles, BTS has walked through moments that no amount of fame could shield them from. We're talking real accidents, real injuries, real fear, the kind that made ARMY hold their breath and flood social media with prayers at 2 a.m. What happens when the most protected idols in K-pop history suddenly become vulnerable right in front of the cameras? Which member kept performing with an injury so severe that doctors later said it could have ended his career? Who collapsed backstage and still walked out on stage like nothing happened? And which accident was so sudden, so shocking, that even the members themselves couldn't hold back their tears? Tonight, we're counting down 7 heart-stopping moments that proved BTS aren't just artists, they're warriors. From freak stage mishaps to behind-the-scenes emergencies that fans never fully saw, every single story on this list will remind you why this group is built different. Lock in, because this isn't your usual fan edit compilation. This is the real deal. Starting from number 7, all the way down to the one moment that shook the entire fandom to its core, let's get into it. Number 7. RM. The leader who slipped into danger on a rain-soaked stage. You know what's wild? When people talk about Kim Namjoon, they talk about his genius-level IQ, his poetic lyrics, his United Nations speeches, and the way he leads the biggest boy band in human history with the calm energy of a philosopher. But here's the thing nobody likes to remember. Namjoon is also the member who has danced with danger more times than any leader should, and one particular night, the stage itself almost took him out. We're going back to BTS's outdoor stadium era, when the group was performing in front of tens of thousands of fans under open skies, and the weather decided it wasn't going to cooperate. If you've ever watched concert fan cams from that period, you already know what I'm talking about. Stages that turned into ice rinks the moment the rain started falling. And Namjoon, standing at the front of the formation during a high-energy choreography set, hit a patch of water pooling on the stage surface and his feet just went out from under him. Not a little stumble. Not a cute trip that fans would edit into a funny compilation. His body dropped hard, his knees hitting the stage floor with a sound that fans in the front rows said they could actually hear over the music. The members behind him didn't even see it happen at first because the choreography required them to face different directions, and by the time J-Hope glanced over, Namjoon was already pushing himself back up, teeth clenched, legs visibly shaking, rejoining the formation like he hadn't just slammed into a wet steel platform at full speed. The fan cams from that night are genuinely hard to watch because you can see the exact microsecond it happens. His left foot slides forward, his right knee buckles, and there's this split-second expression on his face that isn't pain, it's pure shock. The kind of shock that comes when your body does something your brain didn't authorize. And here's the context people forget. K-pop stages aren't wooden dance studio floors. These are massive industrial-grade platforms made of metal, acrylic, and sometimes even glass panels, elevated several feet above the ground, often with hydraulic lifts, trapdoors, and moving sections built right into the surface. When those stages get wet, they become legitimately treacherous. There are documented cases across the K-pop industry of idols breaking bones, tearing ligaments, and suffering concussions from stage falls, and Namjoon was performing on exactly that kind of surface, in dress shoes that were chosen for aesthetics and definitely not for grip. What made this moment even more unsettling was the aftermath. Namjoon didn't just finish the song, he finished the entire concert. He performed every remaining track on the set list, hitting every mark, executing every choreography sequence, and even doing his solo stage where he walks across the extended runway that stretches out into the audience. Fans who were there said they noticed him subtly favoring his right leg during certain movements, adjusting his weight distribution in ways that were almost invisible unless you were specifically watching for it. It wasn't until after the concert, when fan-taken photos surfaced online, that ARMY noticed the dark bruising already forming on his knee through the ripped fabric of his stage pants. The online reaction was immediate and visceral. Korean fan communities started trending hashtags demanding big hit entertainment invest in better stage safety measures, non-slip surfaces, and weather contingency plans. International Army translated those demands into English, Spanish, Portuguese, and Japanese, flooding the company's social media with coordinated messages. And here's the part that really gets you. Namjoon himself addressed it casually on a live broadcast a few days later, laughing it off with that signature dimpled smile, saying something like, "The stage was a little slippery, but I'm fine, don't worry." Classic Namjoon. Always deflecting concern away from himself, always redirecting attention back to the fans, always playing down his own pain because he carries this almost stubborn belief that the leader shouldn't be the one people worry about. But ARMY saw through it. They always do. Because the thing about Namjoon's relationship with physical mishaps is that it's not a joke, even though the internet has turned his clumsiness into a meme. This is a man who has broken expensive equipment, walked into glass doors on camera, and tripped over absolutely nothing in the middle of interviews. But when those same tendencies show up on a rain-drenched concert stage in front of 60,000 people, it stops being funny real fast. The gap between clumsy Namjoon as a cute personality trait and Namjoon falling hard on a dangerous surface during a live performance is the gap between entertainment and genuine risk, and that night forced a lot of fans to confront that reality. What stays with you about this moment isn't just the fall itself, it's what it reveals about the conditions these artists perform under. BTS at their peak were doing back-to-back stadium shows across multiple continents, performing complex choreography in extreme weather conditions, on stages designed to look spectacular, but not necessarily designed to keep 7 humans safe when the sky opens up. Namjoon's fall was a reminder that behind every breathtaking concert is a set of physical risks that fans rarely think about until something goes wrong. And for the leader of BTS, the man who feels personally responsible for every member, every performance, every moment, falling in front of his own audience must have carried a weight that goes way beyond a bruised knee. He got up. He always gets up. But the question ARMY couldn't stop asking that night was simple and haunting. What happens the one time he can't? But if you think a rain-soaked stage slip sounds scary, wait until you hear what happened to the member at number 6, because this one didn't just shake the fans, it shook the entire group from the inside out. Number 6. Jimin. The perfectionist who collapsed when his body finally gave up. Let's talk about Park Jimin, because if there's one member of BTS whose relationship with his own body has been a source of both admiration and absolute heartbreak for fans, it's him. And this isn't some vague, behind-the-scenes whisper that got passed around through second-hand accounts. This is a documented, publicly acknowledged medical emergency that forced one of the most dedicated performers in K-pop history to do the one thing he hates more than anything in the world: stop. We're going back to October 2018, right in the middle of the Love Yourself World Tour, when BTS was operating at a level of global dominance that no K-pop act had ever reached before. They were bouncing between continents, performing full production stadium and arena shows with choreography so physically demanding that even professional dancers who react to their performances online openly admit they'd collapse trying to replicate a single song. And Jimin, sweet, relentless, obsessively perfectionist Jimin, was pushing through every single show with an intensity that made even his own members nervous. But here's the thing fans didn't see until it was too late. Jimin's body had been sending distress signals for weeks, maybe months, and he had been ignoring every single one of them. The breaking point came in London. BTS was scheduled to perform at the O2 Arena, one of the most iconic venues in Europe, in front of a sold-out crowd of fans who had waited months, some of them years, for this exact moment. Everything was set. The set list was locked. Rehearsals were done. And then Big Hit Entertainment dropped a statement that hit ARMY like a freight train. Park Jimin would not be performing at the first London show due to severe muscular pain in his neck and shoulders, combined with flu-like symptoms that had left him physically unable to stand for extended periods. The statement was clinical, measured, carefully worded the way entertainment companies always word these things. But fans read between every single line and understood what it really meant. Jimin had collapsed. His body had simply refused to carry him any further. The online reaction was unlike anything the fandom had experienced up to that point. Within minutes of the announcement, hashtags related to Jimin's health were trending worldwide. Fan accounts that normally posted memes and concert edits switched overnight into prayer chains and emotional threads detailing every moment from recent performances where Jimin had looked pale, where his movements seemed slightly off, where his smile didn't quite reach his eyes the way it usually does. And that's when the deeper conversation exploded, because Jimin's collapse in London wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of years of self-imposed physical punishment that the fandom had been watching unfold in real time with increasing alarm. Go back to early BTS, back to 2013, 2014, 2015, the years when the group was still fighting for survival in an industry that chews up rookie groups and spits them out without a second thought. Jimin has openly talked about the extreme dieting he put himself through during that era, eating one meal a day, sometimes skipping food entirely for days at a time, driven by a toxic cocktail of perfectionism, industry beauty standards, and the desperate desire to be good enough for the fans who were just starting to notice BTS. His members have spoken about it with a rawness that's almost uncomfortable to hear. Suga once described watching Jimin faint during practice and not being able to do anything about it because Jimin would wake up, insist he was fine, and immediately get back into formation. Jungkook has mentioned moments where Jimin would be so dizzy from lack of nutrition that he'd have to hold onto walls just to walk down a hallway. And Jimin himself, in one of the most heartbreaking moments in BTS documentary history, admitted with tears streaming down his face that there were periods where he genuinely believed he wasn't good enough, that his body wasn't right, that he needed to keep shrinking himself to earn his place on that stage. That context is what makes the London collapse so devastating, because it wasn't just a bad flu or a muscle cramp. It was Jimin's body finally cashing in years of debt that he had been accumulating through relentless self-sacrifice. Every skipped meal, every extra hour of practice when the other members had already gone home, every moment he danced through pain because Park Jimin does not stop, does not complain, does not let the audience see anything less than absolute perfection. All of it piled up until his muscles literally locked up and his body said, "No more." What happened next is the part that still makes ARMY emotional years later. Jimin reportedly cried backstage, not from the physical pain, but from the guilt. He was devastated that fans had traveled from all over Europe, some spending their savings on flights and hotels, and he couldn't be there for them. The members tried to comfort him, tried to tell him that his health mattered more than any single performance, but anyone who knows Jimin knows that logic doesn't work on him when it comes to ARMY. He carries the weight of every fan's expectation on his shoulders like a personal covenant, and breaking that covenant, even for legitimate medical reasons, felt to him like a betrayal. He returned for the second London show. Of course he did. Because that's who Jimin is. He walked out on that stage with his neck still visibly stiff, his movements slightly more restrained than usual during certain choreography sequences, and he performed with every ounce of energy his recovering body could produce. Fans in the audience said his eyes were red, whether from exhaustion or emotion or both, nobody could tell. But he was there. He showed up. And when the concert ended and the lights went down, fan accounts near the stage reported seeing staff members immediately rush to his side, supporting him as he walked off. The aftermath of this incident sparked a genuine reckoning within ARMY about the cost of perfection. Fan forums that had previously celebrated Jimin's dedication and work ethic started having uncomfortable conversations about where the line is between admiration and enabling. When fans cheer for an idol who dances until he drops, are they supporting his passion or feeding a cycle that literally puts him in the hospital? It's a question that still doesn't have a clean answer, and Jimin's London collapse is the moment that forced the fandom to sit with that discomfort. Because the terrifying truth about Jimin isn't that he fell, it's that everyone, including himself, knew it was coming and nobody could stop it. That's the thing about perfectionists who love too hard. They don't break suddenly, they break slowly, in front of everyone, and by the time the collapse comes, it's been building for years. But if Jimin's story hit you in the heart, brace yourself. Because the member at number 5 faced a moment so sudden, so physically violent, that there was no warning, no build-up, just pure shock in front of a live audience that couldn't do anything but scream. Number 5. Suga. The trainee who got hit by a car and hit it to save his dream. This one right here? This isn't just an accident story. This is a survival story, a desperation story, a story about a kid from Daegu who wanted to make music so badly that he let a car accident nearly destroy his body and said absolutely nothing because the alternative, losing his shot at debut, was worse than any physical pain a broken shoulder could deliver. We're talking about Min Yoongi, the man the world knows as Suga, the man ARMY knows as HYBE, and before any of those names meant anything to anyone outside of a tiny basement studio in Seoul, he was just a broke, exhausted trainee working a part-time delivery job at night to keep himself alive while training during the day at a company that most of the industry didn't even take seriously yet. Big Hit Entertainment in 2012 was not the empire it is today. It was a small, struggling company operating on fumes and faith, run by a producer named Bang Si-hyuk who had a vision, but very little financial cushion. The trainees, including Yoongi, weren't living in luxury dorms with catered meals and personal stylists. They were crammed into shared rooms, eating cheap convenience store food, and wondering every single day if the company would survive long enough to actually debut them. And Yoongi, who had left his family in Daegu against their wishes to chase a music career in Seoul, was carrying the additional weight of proving that his decision wasn't a mistake. So he worked. During the day, he trained, vocal lessons, dance practice, recording sessions, evaluations that could make or break his position in the lineup. At night, when the other trainees went to sleep, Yoongi went out to deliver. Some accounts say newspapers, others say food. The specifics vary depending on the interview, but what doesn't vary is the picture it paints: a teenage kid riding through the streets of Seoul in the dark, racing against time to make a few ones so he could afford to eat and keep training, knowing that if he slowed down, if he stopped, if he gave up even one of these jobs, the dream dies. And then one night, it happened. A car hit him. Not a gentle bump, not a sideswipe. Yoongi was struck while he was on his delivery route, and the impact was severe enough to wreck his shoulder. The details of the actual collision are something Yoongi has never fully laid out in graphic terms, and, honestly, you can understand why. But what he has shared, across multiple interviews and in the raw emotional confessionals that show up in his music as HYBE, is enough to reconstruct the horror of that moment, the screech of tires, or maybe no screech at all, the impact, the pavement, and then the aftermath where a trainee with no money, no health insurance through the company, and no safety net had to make a decision that would define the next decade of his life. He chose silence. Let that sit for a second. Min Yoongi, lying somewhere with a shoulder that had just been structurally damaged by a car collision, made the calculated decision to not tell Big Hit Entertainment what had happened. Not because he was being reckless, not because he was being stupid, but because he understood the math with brutal clarity. If the company found out their trainee was injured, seriously injured, the kind of injured that affects dance practice and stage performance, they would have every reason to cut him from the debut lineup. Trainees get replaced. That's how the industry works. There's always another kid waiting in line, another hungry teenager from another small town who's willing to do whatever it takes. Yoongi knew that his spot in what would eventually become BTS was not guaranteed, and a busted shoulder was exactly the kind of liability that could erase years of sacrifice overnight. So he trained through it. He danced through it. He performed evaluations with a shoulder that medical professionals would later confirm had sustained serious damage, a torn labrum, the kind of injury that athletes get surgery for immediately, and he said nothing. He gritted his teeth during choreography, adjusted his movements to compensate for the limited range of motion, and developed an entire system of subtle physical workarounds to hide the fact that one of his shoulders was essentially operating at a fraction of its capacity. And here's the part that makes producers and dance trainers who've worked in K-pop openly shake their heads in disbelief. Nobody caught it. Or if they did, they didn't push hard enough to get the truth. Yoongi made it through training, made it through the final lineup selection, and debuted with BTS on June 13, 2013, with a shoulder that was held together by willpower and silence. But the body keeps score. It always does. Throughout BTS's career, observant fans noticed patterns, moments during concerts where Suga would subtly rotate his left shoulder between songs, backstage footage where he'd press ice packs against his shoulder area while the other members were stretching, interviews where he'd unconsciously reach up and grip his shoulder while talking, a gesture so habitual that it became almost invisible. The injury didn't heal because it was never properly treated. It just became part of him, this constant low-grade pain that lived inside his body like a tenant who refuses to leave, flaring up during intense choreography, aching during cold weather, reminding him every single day of that night on the Seoul streets when a car took something from him that he couldn't get back. The full truth didn't come out to the public until much later, and when it did, the emotional shockwave through ARMY was devastating. Fans went back through years of content, concert footage, behind-the-scenes videos, V-Lives, interviews, and started connecting dots that had been hiding in plain sight the entire time. Every wince they dismissed as exhaustion, every moment where Suga seemed to pull back slightly during a dance break, every time he joked about not being a great dancer with that dry, self-deprecating humor that fans loved. It all suddenly reframed itself through the lens of a man who had been performing with a significant untreated injury for years. In November 2020, Yoongi finally had surgery. The announcement came through a Weverse post, clinical and straightforward in typical Suga fashion, but the subtext was enormous. After roughly 8 years of carrying this injury, 8 years of world tours, of award show performances, of dance practices and recording sessions, and a schedule that would break most healthy people, he was finally letting doctors fix what that car had broken on a dark delivery route in 2012. The recovery took him off active duty for weeks, and during that absence, ARMY held a collective breath that they'd been holding, in some ways, since the moment they first learned the truth. What makes Suga's story resonate so deeply isn't the accident itself. Car accidents happen every day to millions of people, and most of them don't become mythologized in global fandoms. It's the choice that followed the accident. The terrifying, calculated, heartbreaking choice of a kid who looked at his shattered shoulder and his shattered dream and decided that the dream was worth more than his body. That's not just dedication. That's a level of sacrifice that borders on something almost spiritual, a willingness to suffer in silence, because the alternative, going back to Taehyung, admitting defeat, watching someone else stand in his spot on debut day, was a pain that no shoulder injury could match. Min Yoongi turned his trauma into music, his pain into poetry, and his silence into a career that changed the global entertainment industry. But the cost of that silence lived in his bones for nearly a decade, and every time ARMY watches him roll that shoulder during a concert, they remember what it took to get him there. Now, if you think hiding a car accident injury for 8 years is intense, the member coming up at number 4 experienced something that happened so fast, in front of so many cameras, that there was nowhere to hide, and the footage still makes fans flinch to this day. Number 4. Jungkook. The golden magne who broke down when his body betrayed him on the world's biggest stage. If there is one member of BTS who the world has collectively decided is physically invincible, it's Jungkook. This is the guy who does backflips during concerts like he's taking a casual stroll, who picks up new sports and masters them within hours on camera, who arm wrestles the hyungs and wins without breaking a sweat, who runs across stadium-length stages at full sprint while singing live and somehow doesn't even look winded by the end of it. The golden magne. The guy who's good at literally everything. The human cheat code. So when that body, that seemingly indestructible, genetically blessed, endlessly capable body, finally broke down in the middle of a world tour, in front of an arena packed with tens of thousands of fans, the shock wasn't just that Jungkook got hurt. The shock was that it was even possible. We're talking about the Love Yourself, Speak Yourself World Tour, 2019, the era when BTS wasn't just a K-pop act anymore, but a global phenomenon performing at venues that Western artists spend entire careers trying to book. Wembley Stadium, the Rose Bowl, Soldier Field, MetLife Stadium, these weren't arenas, these were monuments, and BTS was filling every single seat. The pressure on every member during that tour was astronomical, but Jungkook carried a specific kind of weight because his role in the group's live performance is physically the most demanding. He's the center of major choreography formations. He handles some of the most acrobatic stage elements, and his position as the main vocalist means he's delivering the most vocally challenging parts, while simultaneously executing moves that would gas a professional dancer who didn't have to sing a single note. It was during this relentless stretch of back-to-back stadium performances that Jungkook's heel gave out. Not metaphorically. Not in some gradual, I've been feeling a little sore kind of way. His heel, the Achilles area, the foundation that every single movement on stage depends on, sustained an injury severe enough that the moment it happened, everyone watching knew something was seriously wrong. Fancams captured the exact moment, Jungkook landing from a jump during choreography and his body registering the impact in a way it never had before, a visible flinch that rippled through his entire frame, followed by that unmistakable micro-expression that athletes make when something structural just shifted in a way it shouldn't have. He didn't scream, didn't grab his foot, didn't drop to the floor, because this is Jungkook, and Jungkook's first instinct when something goes wrong is to pretend nothing happened and keep going. And keep going he did, for a while, adjusting his weight to his other foot, modifying his movements in real time, delivering his vocals with the same power while his body rerouted around the damage like a machine compensating for a failing component. But the injury was too significant to mask for an entire concert, let alone an entire tour leg. Big Hit Entertainment released a statement confirming that Jungkook had injured his heel and that he would be modifying his participation in upcoming performances. And that's when fans saw something they never expected to see and never wanted to see. Jungkook, the member who defines himself through physical excellence, sitting in a chair on stage while his 6 brothers danced around him. The images from those concerts are burned into ARMY's collective memory. Jungkook, positioned center stage in a chair, still singing every note with full power, still doing upper body movements, still engaging with the crowd with that magnetic charisma that makes 60,000 people feel like he's looking directly at each one of them individually, but unable to stand, unable to dance, unable to do the one thing that has been woven into his identity since he was a 15-year-old trainee who chose Big Hit over 7 other companies because he watched Namjoon perform and decided that was his future. And that's where the emotion hit. Not during the injury itself, not during the announcement, but during the concerts that followed, when cameras caught Jungkook watching his members perform choreography that he knew by heart, choreography that his body could execute in his sleep. And his eyes would glass over with a frustration so raw and so visible that fans in the audience started crying just from looking at him. There's a specific fan cam, and if you've been in ARMY for any length of time, you know exactly which one I'm talking about, where the camera catches Jungkook during a dance break, sitting in his chair. And his hands are unconsciously moving through the choreography on his lap, fingers tapping out the rhythm, shoulders subtly following the counts, his muscle memory performing the dance that his heel wouldn't let his legs execute. He didn't even realize he was doing it. That clip went viral beyond the BTS fandom, shared by people who had no idea who Jungkook was but recognized in that moment something universally human. The agony of being forced to watch from the sidelines while your body refuses to do what your spirit is begging it to do. What made this entire situation even more gut-wrenching was Jungkook's response to it. In a live broadcast after one of the modified performances, visibly emotional, voice cracking in that way that Jungkook's voice only cracks when he's genuinely fighting back tears, he apologized. He apologized to ARMY for not being able to give them the full performance they paid for, the full experience they deserved. He said he felt like he was letting people down, like he wasn't earning his place on that stage if he couldn't give 100%. And ARMY collectively lost it, because here was a 21-year-old kid who had just performed a 2.5-hour concert from a chair, singing live with the vocal precision of a studio recording, radiating charisma that most performers can't generate while standing on 2 healthy legs, and he was apologizing. The members pushed back on it immediately, the way they always do when one of them starts spiraling into guilt. Namjoon addressed it publicly, making it clear that Jungkook had nothing to apologize for. Jin, in his typical fashion, cracked jokes to lighten the mood while simultaneously making sure Jungkook knew he was being ridiculous. Jimin, who understood better than anyone what it feels like to have your body betray you on stage, sat with Jungkook and said the things that only someone who's been through it can say. But the scar of that experience lingered long after the heel healed. Fans who followed Jungkook's subsequent performances noticed a new layer of intensity in his dancing, a ferocity that hadn't been there before. As if every performance post-injury was Jungkook's way of proving to himself that his body would never sideline him again. The heel injury didn't just hurt him physically, it cracked something in his self-image, in his identity as the member who could always do everything, and the process of rebuilding that identity played out on stages across the world for months afterward. What stays with you about Jungkook's accident isn't the injury, because injuries heal. It's the image of the golden magne sitting in that chair, hands dancing on his lap, eyes locked on his brother's, carrying a weight that had nothing to do with his heel and everything to do with the impossible standards he sets for himself. He sat down, but he never stopped performing. And somehow, that made the whole thing hurt even more. But if watching Jungkook fight through frustration from a chair wrecked you, the member at number 3 went through something that didn't give them the luxury of sitting down, because when it happened, there was no chair, no warning, and no ground beneath their feet. Number 3. V. The moment Taehyung disappeared off the edge of the stage and ARMY stopped breathing. There's a specific category of fear that only live performance can produce, the kind that doesn't build, doesn't warn you, doesn't give you even a single second to brace yourself. One frame, everything is fine. The next frame, the person you're watching is gone, and your brain takes a full beat to process what just happened because the visual information doesn't match what you expected to see. That's exactly what happened to Kim Taehyung, and if you were a fan watching it in real time, either in the venue or through a live stream, you already know that the memory of that moment still sits in your chest like a stone you can't quite swallow. The incident happened during a fan event, one of those more intimate, scaled-down BTS appearances where the distance between the stage and the audience is smaller, where the members are more relaxed, more playful, moving around with a casualness that you don't see during the tightly choreographed arena shows. These events are supposed to be the safe spaces, the fun zones, the moments where BTS gets to just be 7 guys goofing around with the people who love them most. And Taehyung, being Taehyung, was fully in his element, animated, expressive, bouncing around the stage with that unpredictable energy that has always been one of his most magnetic qualities. He was engaging with fans, moving toward the edge of the stage the way idols do when they want to get closer to the audience, leaning in, making eye contact, doing all the things that make fan events feel personal and electric. And then he was gone. Not a stumble that he caught. Not a trip that he recovered from with a laugh and a dramatic pose. Taehyung went off the edge of that stage, and the footage, which fans have analyzed frame by frame thousands of times since, shows the sickening reality of a human body dropping from an elevated platform with zero preparation. His foot found air where it expected floor, his center of gravity shifted past the point of recovery, and gravity did what gravity does without mercy or negotiation. The sound that the audience made in that moment is something that people who were there still talk about. It wasn't a scream in the traditional sense. It was a collective gasp, a sharp involuntary intake of breath from hundreds of people simultaneously, followed by a silence that lasted maybe 2 seconds, but felt like it stretched across an eternity. Because in that silence, nobody knew. Nobody knew if he was okay, if he'd landed on his feet or his back or his head, if the fall was 2 feet or 6 feet, if they were about to witness a genuine medical emergency, or if Taehyung would pop back up with that boxy grin and turn the whole thing into a comedic moment. The uncertainty was the worst part. For those 2 seconds, every single person in that venue and every single person watching remotely existed in a state of pure dread, the kind that sits in the pit of your stomach and makes your hands go cold. And then he reappeared. Taehyung pulled himself back up, and the relief that flooded through the audience was so intense that some fans burst into tears on the spot, not because they were sad, but because the adrenaline crash of going from "he might be seriously hurt" to "he's standing" in the span of a few seconds overwhelmed their nervous systems completely. But here's what made the aftermath complicated and, in many ways, more unsettling than the fall itself. Taehyung immediately played it off. He smiled. He laughed. He waved his hands in that classic K-pop idol gesture of, I'm fine, don't worry about me, and went right back into the fan event like nothing had happened. And in the moment, fans wanted to believe it. They wanted to accept the smile at face value because the alternative, that he was hurt and masking it, was too uncomfortable to sit with during what was supposed to be a happy event. But the cameras don't lie, and when fan-taken footage circulated online in the hours and days after the event, people started noticing things. The way Taehyung's movements became slightly more guarded after the fall, the way he stayed a few steps further from the stage edge than he normally would, the almost imperceptible moments where his expression flickered into something private and pained before he reset his face back to performance mode. Some fans pointed out that he seemed to be favoring one side of his body during later portions of the event. Subtle shifts in posture that you'd only notice if you were looking for them, or if you'd watched enough Taehyung content to have his normal body language memorized down to the micro-expression level, which, being ARMY, of course they had. The conversation that erupted online after the incident went far beyond just Taehyung's specific fall. It cracked open a broader discussion about stage safety in the K-pop industry that had been simmering for years. Because Taehyung's fall wasn't an anomaly, it was part of a pattern that stretched across the entire industry. Stages at fan events, music shows, and even major concerts were frequently designed with aesthetics prioritized over performer safety. Elevated platforms without adequate railings, stage extensions with edges marked by nothing more than a strip of LED lighting that actually made it harder to see where the floor ended, moving stage pieces that created unexpected gaps. The list of design choices that put performers at risk was long and well documented by fans who had been compiling evidence across multiple fandoms for years. Taehyung's fall became a case study in that ongoing conversation, a visceral, undeniable example of what happens when the spectacular demands of K-pop staging collide with the basic physical vulnerability of the humans performing on those stages. Fan communities mobilized, sending formal complaints and safety requests to event organizers, venue managers, and Big Hit Entertainment itself, demanding better stage inspections, visible edge markings, protective barriers, and contingency protocols for outdoor and temporary stages. What makes Taehyung's stage fall linger in ARMY's collective consciousness isn't just the fear of the moment, it's what it revealed about the contract between idol and audience. Taehyung's immediate instinct after falling off a stage was not to check himself for injuries, not to sit down, not to ask for medical attention. His immediate instinct was to reassure the fans. To smile through whatever pain he was feeling because the emotional well-being of the people watching him mattered more to him in that moment than his own physical safety. And that instinct, beautiful, selfless, and deeply troubling all at once, is something that runs through every single story on this list like a thread that you can't pull without unraveling something much bigger. Taehyung fell, and the world gasped. But the real fall, the one that nobody talks about, is the expectation that he should get back up smiling. He did. But he shouldn't have had to. Now, if a body disappearing off the edge of a stage made your heart stop, the member at number 2 endured something that didn't happen under bright lights or roaring crowds. It happened quietly, behind closed doors, and by the time fans found out, the damage had already been done. Number 2. Jimin. The eldest who faced surgery at the worst possible moment and still gave ARMY one last smile. Timing in life can be kind or it can be absolutely merciless, and what happened to Kim Seokjin in October 2022 was the universe choosing cruelty at the exact moment when kindness was needed most. To understand why Jin's accident hit different, why it carried a weight that went beyond the physical injury itself, you need to understand the context, because without the context, it's just a hand injury. And hand injuries happen to people every day without making international headlines. But this wasn't every day. This was the final chapter of an era, the closing weeks of BTS as a complete 7-member active unit before military enlistment would begin pulling them apart one by one, and Jimin, the eldest, the young, The member who had always known he would be the first to go was living on borrowed time with every schedule, every recording session, every moment with ARMY carrying the unspoken weight of this might be one of the last ones for a while. And it was in the middle of that impossibly emotional countdown that Jin injured the tendon in his left index finger during a routine daily activity. Not on stage. Not during some dramatic concert moment where cameras captured the exact second of impact. It happened privately, quietly, in the kind of mundane circumstance that makes injuries feel even more cruel because there's no glory in the story, no narrative arc, just a sudden, sharp reality that something in his hand had torn and it wasn't going to fix itself. Big Hit Entertainment released a statement confirming that Jin had undergone surgery to repair the damaged tendon, and the moment that announcement dropped, ARMY's timeline fractured into a collective emotional crisis that was unlike anything a simple injury announcement would normally produce. Because this wasn't just about a finger. This was about everything that finger represented in the context of what was coming. Jin was weeks away from enlisting in the South Korean military, a mandatory service obligation that would take him away from the group, from the stage, from ARMY for approximately 18 months. Every remaining day on his calendar was precious, every remaining schedule was weighted with the significance of finality, and now a chunk of those remaining days would be spent in surgical recovery, wearing a cast, managing pain, attending follow-up appointments, and navigating the physical limitations that come with having a repaired tendon in your dominant hand. Fans immediately spiraled into the practical concerns. Would he be able to perform? Would his remaining schedules be cancelled? Would the injury affect his military service? Could basic training activities aggravate a freshly repaired tendon? The questions cascaded endlessly, each one branching into darker possibilities that fans tried not to voice but couldn't stop thinking about. And underneath all of those practical concerns was the emotional devastation of watching Jin's already shrinking window of time with ARMY get squeezed even tighter by something as random and uncontrollable as a tendon injury. But here's where Kim Seokjin proved, once again, why he is the emotional bedrock of BTS, because he didn't retreat. He didn't cancel everything and disappear into recovery the way anyone would have had every right to do. Instead, Jin showed up. He showed up with a cast on his hand, with surgical tape visible on his finger, and he fulfilled the schedules that mattered most to him with a determination that was simultaneously inspiring and heartbreaking to witness. The most vivid example came in Buenos Aires, Argentina, at a Coldplay concert where Jin performed The Astronaut, his solo single that he had co-written with Chris Martin, a song that, in the context of his upcoming enlistment, had taken on a meaning so deep that fans couldn't listen to it without crying. Jin stood on that stage in front of a massive South American crowd, cast on his hand, and sang a song about an astronaut who must leave the planet he loves, knowing that every single word was a metaphor for what was about to happen in his real life. The footage from that night is genuinely difficult to watch without getting emotional, because you can see it on his face, the joy of performing mixed with the bittersweet awareness that this was farewell. All of it filtered through the physical reality of a hand that was still healing from surgery. He held the microphone carefully, adjusting his grip to accommodate the injury, and when the song reached its emotional peak, the crowd sang every word back to him so loudly that he stopped singing entirely and just listened, standing there with his injured hand at his side and tears building in his eyes that he fought with every ounce of his legendary composure. Fans in the audience later described that moment as one of the most emotionally overwhelming experiences of their lives, not just because of the music, but because of the visible, tangible evidence of Jin's vulnerability. The cast on his hand wasn't hidden. It wasn't disguised or downplayed. It was right there under the stadium lights, a physical reminder that the man standing on that stage was not a character, not an untouchable idol, but a human being who was hurt and healing and still choosing to give everything he had to the people who loved him before time ran out. The recovery process continued as Jin transitioned into military life in December 2022, and fans tracked his journey with an anxiety that bordered on obsessive. Every detail that emerged from his service, photos, updates, second-hand reports from other enlisted soldiers, was scrutinized for any sign that his hand was healing properly, that the military's physical demands weren't compromising his recovery, that he would emerge from service with full function in his finger and the ability to return to the stage without limitation. The fear wasn't irrational. Tendon injuries, especially in the hand, are notoriously tricky. Incomplete healing can result in permanent stiffness, reduced range of motion, and chronic discomfort that might not prevent daily activities, but could absolutely impact the precise, demanding finger work required for playing instruments, performing choreography with hand-intensive movements, and the countless other physical tasks that being a global performer demands. For 18 months, that fear lived quietly in the back of every army's mind, a low-frequency hum of worry that only fully resolved when Jin completed his service and began showing signs of full physical recovery. What makes Jin's story the second most heartbreaking on this list isn't the severity of the injury. By pure medical standards, a tendon repair is serious, but not life-threatening. It's the timing. It's the cosmic unfairness of an injury choosing to strike during the one window of time when every single moment was irreplaceable. Other injuries on this list happened during tours that had dozens of remaining dates, during careers that stretched ahead with years of future performances. Jin's injury hit during a countdown, during a closing, during the final pages of a chapter that couldn't be rewritten or extended. Every moment the cast was on his hand was a moment stolen from a finite supply, and the grief that Army felt wasn't about the finger, it was about the time. Because time, more than any tendon, was the thing they couldn't repair. Now, if you think the cruelty of timing made Jin's story devastating, the member at number 1 endured something that goes beyond bad timing, beyond stage accidents, beyond even physical injury. This is the story that tested not just a body, but the very foundation of who this person believed they could become, and the answer nearly broke them before BTS ever existed. Number 1. J-Hope, the dancer whose body bled on stage and still refused to stop the music. Every single story on this list has shown you a different shade of sacrifice, a leader who fell on a wet stage, a perfectionist whose body shut down, a trainee who had a car accident for 8 years, a golden magne forced into a chair, a free spirit who vanished off the edge of a platform, and an eldest brother who faced surgery during the most painful countdown of his life. But the number 1 spot on this list belongs to the member whose sacrifice is written not just in medical records or fan accounts, but in the very DNA of every BTS performance you've ever watched, because without young Hoseok, without J-Hope, there is no choreography, there is no precision, there is no machine-like synchronization that turned 7 guys from a tiny company into the most watched performers on the planet. And the price he paid for building that machine nearly destroyed him in front of everyone. Let's get something straight before we go any further. J-Hope isn't just BTS's main dancer. That title, while technically accurate, undersells what he actually does by a magnitude that borders on criminal. J-Hope is the group's dance captain, choreography director, formation architect, and movement quality controller. He's the member who stays latest in the practice room, who runs individual sessions with members who are struggling with specific sequences, who watches playback footage of every performance with a critical eye that would make film directors uncomfortable. When BTS hits a move in perfect unison, all 7 bodies snapping to the same angle at the same millisecond, that's not natural talent alone. That's Hoseok's work. That's hours and hours of him drilling the group, correcting angles by fractions of degrees, counting beats until the rhythm is embedded in muscle memory so deep that the members could perform the choreography in their sleep. And that level of obsessive physical dedication comes with a cost that the audience never sees, until the night it became impossible to hide. It was during a live performance, under the kind of high-intensity stage lighting that turns every bead of sweat into a visible diamond, when fans in the front rows and cameras capturing close-up angles noticed something terrifying on J-Hope's face: blood. Not a small smear that could be mistaken for makeup. Actual blood, streaming from his nose, appearing mid-choreography during one of the most physically demanding sequences in the set list. A nosebleed triggered by the extreme physical exertion, the dehydration that comes from performing under scorching stage lights, the cumulative exhaustion of back-to-back schedules. and a body that had been pushed so far past its limits that capillaries in his nasal passages simply gave way under the pressure. And here's the thing that elevates this moment from scary to genuinely terrifying. J-Hope did not stop. He didn't signal to the stage manager. He didn't step to the back of the formation. He didn't even raise a hand to wipe the blood away during the first critical seconds, because doing so would have meant breaking choreography, and young Hoseok does not break choreography. The fan cams from that performance are the kind of footage that makes you understand the difference between an entertainer and something else entirely, something closer to a soldier. Something closer to a person operating on a frequency where the mission supersedes the body. You can see the exact moment he becomes aware of the blood, a micro flicker in his eyes, a split-second calculation happening behind that stage smile, and then the decision, instant, absolute, non-negotiable, to keep going. He adjusted. Subtly, almost invisibly, he began using the back of his hand between formations to manage the bleeding, timing his wipes to moments when the choreography naturally brought his hand near his face, turning a medical situation into a piece of stagecraft so seamless that casual viewers wouldn't have even noticed. But ARMY noticed. They always notice when it comes to J-Hope, because the fandom has long understood that Hoseok is the member most likely to hide his pain behind sunshine, the member whose entire public persona is built on being the group's energy source, the mood maker. The human shot of serotonin, and that persona, as beautiful as it is, functions as a nearly impenetrable mask that makes it almost impossible to tell when he's suffering. The nosebleed incident cracked that mask wide open. Because blood doesn't lie. Blood doesn't perform. Blood on the face of BTS's main dancer during a live stage isn't something that can be edited out, laughed off, or reframed as a cute behind-the-scenes moment. It's raw, it's visceral, and it forced fans to confront a reality they'd been tiptoeing around for years. J-Hope was burning himself alive for this group, and the fire was starting to show. What the nosebleed revealed, when fans started pulling the thread, was a pattern of physical sacrifice that stretched back to the very beginning of BTS's career. Hoseok had been nursing injuries for years, ankle strains that he danced through, knee inflammation that he managed with ice packs and painkillers between stages, back pain that flared up during the most demanding choreography sets, and that he treated backstage with the urgency of a pit crew fixing a race car before sending it back onto the track. Former staff members and choreographers who've worked with BTS have spoken, in carefully worded interviews, about Hoseok's relationship with his own physical limits, describing it with a mixture of admiration and genuine concern. He doesn't have an off switch. When the other members finish practice at the scheduled time, Hoseok stays. When the choreographer says a sequence is good enough, Hoseok runs it again. When his body sends pain signals, Hoseok receives them, acknowledges them, and then overrides them with a willpower that is frankly inhuman. And the nosebleed, that moment of blood under stadium lights, was the physical manifestation of what happens when willpower collides with biological reality. So there it is. 7 members. 7 moments that shook the fandom, broke hearts, and proved that the price of global stardom is paid in flesh, bone, and silent tears that the cameras almost never catch. But if you zoom out from each individual story and look at them together, side by side, as a complete portrait, something bigger emerges, something that goes beyond any single accident or any single member. What you're really looking at is a system. An industry built on the idea that the show must go on, no matter what, that the audience's experience outweighs the performer's pain, that smiling through agony is professionalism, that asking for rest is weakness. Every member on this list internalized that belief so deeply that their first instinct after injury wasn't to seek help, it was to apologize. RM got up and finished the concert. Jimin cried not from pain but from guilt. Suga hid a car accident for years. Jungkook apologized from a wheelchair. Taehyung smiled seconds after falling off a stage. Jimin performed with a surgical cast. J-Hope danced through his own blood. 7 different accidents. 1 identical response. Protect the audience from the truth. And that's the conversation this list is really about. Not just what happened, but why did they respond the way they did? Why does a culture exist where the most loved artists in the world believe that their pain is less important than their fans' comfort? Why do we celebrate endurance without questioning whether endurance should have been necessary in the first place? BTS changed the music industry. They broke barriers that people said were unbreakable. They proved that language, geography, and industry gatekeeping couldn't stop 7 kids from a small company from becoming the biggest act on the planet. But the stories on this list reveal the other side of that miracle, the bruises beneath the trophies, the hospital visits between the stadium shows, the moments where the human beings inside the legend were reminded, painfully and undeniably, that they are not invincible. ARMY already knows this. ARMY has always known this. And maybe that's the real reason these stories hit so hard, not because fans are surprised, but because they recognize in every single one of these moments the people they love being asked to give more than any person should have to give, and giving it anyway. 7 members. 7 stories. One truth, behind every perfect performance is a body that paid for it. And the least we can do as fans, as an audience, as the people who benefit from their sacrifice, is to never forget that. That's our list. Stay safe, stay curious, and we'll see you on the next one.